Okay, this is pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good about this one. May not be a good one, but it's my last one. I'll have all my lectures online now. Okay, end up the way we should end up, the way it all ends up. Death and bereavement. Death, like everything in life, is very complicated. It is a biological fact. It occurs when your heart stops beating and your brain quits working. Social, cultural, religious factors really impact how we die, what happens at death, prior to, at death, and after death. Developmentally, depends on when we confront death, what age we are, whether it's our own or somebody else's, has a lot of impacts. Historical trends, things have changed as far as death. Legal, it's a very complicated thing. Psychological, medical, ethical considerations. It's just a very complicated situation for something that's so simple in its own way. Things have changed. We used to lose people mostly in infancy, childhood, and young females, birthings, deaths. But as medical technology has improved, we've pushed death further and further away. Most of us who survive birth are going to survive to a pretty old age. So now it's very much more an old person's situation a lot of the time. Yes, we do lose some along the way, some that we care about, some young, but most are going to make it. We've also, like birth, medicalized death. At one time, death happened at home. The person, when they became ill, were terminal. They stayed at home. They were taken care of at home. When they died, the body was prepared at home, and generally a casket was made and brought, and then the body was taken and buried. We kind of took that all away and put everybody into hospitals to die. And so a lot of people really have not had the opportunity to see death as it occurs. So it tends to be hidden away. And though we do, with the 24-hour news networks and such, we do have lots of opportunities to observe death, at least from a distance. In parts of cities, particularly large cities and such, there's lots of opportunity to see death at hand with the gang deaths, drug use and such. But by and large, it is still, unless there's newsworthy, it's kind of hidden. Thanatology is the study of death and dying. Again, we've had a big change. It used to be that a doctor's job was mainly to keep somebody alive. But again, with the advances in technology, we can keep people alive a long time. So the answer really becomes, when do we allow them to die? When is keeping someone alive causing them harm? So hospice care is a new, relatively new field as far as the medical establishment is concerned, and it's really for people who are dying, people who have been declared terminal and either decide not to continue treatment, or the decision is made that the treatment will do no good, besides maybe causing pain and suffering. So palliative care, hospice is available either in some of the hospice houses around town, institutions around town, or a lot more and more people are picking to have hospice care at home, so that they can stay the place where they're the most comfortable and die the best they can. So palliative care is geared towards pain and relief of pain and suffering, and dignity of the patient. Terminal drop is a very quick decline in both cognitive and physical abilities shortly before death. It does occur around age 100 for many people who make it that long, but it can also happen to people at whatever age when death gets close. Kubler-Ross was one of the first researchers to look at dying. She talked to 500 terminally ill patients to see how and followed their decline and their death. And she came up with 5 stages that she said was the general trend. Each person's going to have to deal with their own death if they know it's coming in their own way, and people do. But these are the ones she said happen most often. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and hopefully acceptance. Again, not everybody goes through these. Some people never get past denial or anger. They're angry to the very end. Some people don't go through any of these and go right straight to acceptance. Those who have strong religious or spiritual beliefs sometimes can just, if that's how it's supposed to be, then that's how it's supposed to be. So that's a little bit dealing with facing our own death. The other side is the loss of those around us, those near to us. That's probably what's going to happen to most of us, most often. You can only lose yourself one time. You can lose other people as often as you love people. Bereavement and grief. Bereavement is the process of adjusting to death of someone close to you. Grief is the emotions, the emotions that go along with the loss. This is experienced early phase of bereavement, but it's not necessarily the early phase. It can happen for a long, long time. Again, this is a tendency that has been found in research as far as dealing with the loss of a death of someone. Shock and disbelief, this tends to be, if it is a sudden death with no warning, this can really be all-encompassing. The person actually, if you ever had a bad injury and been in shock, you can tell that the injury is going to hurt in a little while, but it doesn't right then. You may not even recognize that you have an injury at first. That's kind of how it is with psychologically with the loss of somebody in a sudden way. It's just like you're cotton all around you. The world is just a little bit displaced. Preoccupation with the memory of the dead person is a big part of it, particularly early on. Hopefully resolution, closing. I don't think people ever get, let's say, I think that a lot of people really never get over the loss of someone close to them, but most of us can get by, get past it, and get on with our lives. 3 patterns of grieving. Again, this is, these are general things. Each person really needs to grieve the way they need to grieve. Generally what happens, the person goes from being very upset, very sad, withdrawn, or however they deal with their grief, and then as time goes on, that things get better. Absent grief, some people may not show grief. Again, if they have strong religious or spiritual beliefs, they may think that this is what should have happened, and that's okay. Also, sometimes, for whatever reason, abuse or whatever else, we can be pleased to see someone go. Or we can be pleased to see someone who we love that is now out of pain and not suffering anymore. So there are reasons not to mourn, at least for some people. Chronic grief can be, well, it is grief that lasts a long time, and it may be a terminal situation. They may never get past the grief. Again, not everybody is upset. High distress, a lot of crying and such at the beginning does not always cause catharsis, a flushing out of the emotions. Sometimes it just keeps on going. Again, not everybody needs to work through it, and for some people it takes a long time or maybe never to get past it. Grief therapy. Again, I do think that everybody needs to get through their grief their own way, but I do recommend, if you're having problems, you're very distressed, that grief therapy can help, even pretty early on. In fact, I'm not a doctor. You don't have to believe this or not. I would try, I myself would try some grief therapy before I tried medications, antidepressants, to try to get past things. Sometimes I'm afraid that antidepressants retard or stop the grieving process and leave it to happen later on when you get off the meds. So again, grief therapy is to help us deal with our loss. These feelings, these emotions, sorrow, guilt, hostility, and anger, are all part of the grieving process, or grief itself. Grief is not a single emotion, and you tend to cycle through these from one to another. And a lot of times what therapists do are just tell us it's okay to feel the way we feel and to get it out. And then that helps get past it. Guys in particular have trouble expressing anything but the hostility and anger, so being able to cry, that sort of thing, can help us. Demonstrating our emotions appropriately tends to be better than the way that we often do it. Ambiguous loss is a very problematic thing. It's the loss where there is there's no proof of death, and so without a body, it's real difficult for loved ones to find closure in the situation. We talked about it in class. There have been, within the last few years, young women who disappeared 5 to 18 years in the past that have been found alive and reasonably well. So this really kind of puts forth for all parents who have, or all people who have missing loved ones, that they might be out there and they might come back. It's just a much more difficult type of death to deal with on some levels. As far as our level of development, children have trouble understanding death because they have trouble understanding many things. They have to learn some things that, such as irreversibility, or this is a permanent situation. I do recommend, to help them deal with it when it comes about, buying your small children or having some pets around, small pets. Goldfish are really good. Buy a number of them, get a nice aquarium, have a bunch of them in there, make sure kids can't tip it over on them or themselves or anything. But one of the nice things about goldfish is that if you have a few of them, one of them is going to die before too long. This gives you the opportunity to talk about death in a place and time that is not really difficult for you. It's very, very difficult to try to explain to children what death is, small children what death is, when you are in the midst of grieving about a death. So generally we don't get too attached to goldfish. We can live with them going. I would recommend discussing these types of things and talk about death. The goldfish did not go to sleep. Please don't talk to your children and use about anything dead and say, well, it's asleep now, because you're going to want to put the kid to bed and you're going to want them to go to sleep, and sleep will have a different meaning to them after you talk about it. Use that term with as part of indication of death. Also, they have left, they've gone away. People who go away usually come back. I'd call it, just like we talk about vaginas and penises to small children, talk about death and dying, because that's what this is. It'll help them understand. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to recommend is when you have that goldfish die, have a funeral for it. If you're going to take your children to funerals to see people, see the services and see people put to rest, do it for them so that they'll understand. Get a box, have a little prayer, maybe a hymn, if you know any, and bury the box. Let them understand what it's all about. Later on, maybe dig the box back up and let them see what happens later on after death. Adolescents, they have trouble understanding death, but it is a big part of their life. They have trouble believing that they can die, even though they see friends of theirs do this. And they tend to, a lot of us are risk takers in adolescence. If we lose somebody in death, we might feel that we're not going to live too long, and we might live for the moment instead of planning for the future. Young adulthood, still in adolescence, still for a long part of young adulthood, anger, frustration, particularly if it's their own. Middle age, very often we have been through enough, seen enough people die, buried enough people that we understand that it happens to all of us. Again, I'm now 52 years old, almost 53, so if I'm not good, unless I live well over 100, I am definitely more than halfway through. I've got fewer days ahead than I do behind, and I really don't find that too disturbing, if you want to know the truth. When you get older and it becomes more inevitable that you're going to die, and before too long, it really kind of depends on the person and their belief systems, that sort of thing. Different people feel different ways about death. Special losses, if you have a spouse, a life partner, if you take the vows and you say you will have and hold till death do you part, then the chances are that if you take those vows seriously, that eventually the relationship is going to end with the death of one or the other of you. You can avoid that by just not getting involved with someone, but make your picks, take your choices. Some, I think, are lucky enough. We talked about it in class. Sometimes in an auto accident, you hear about an old couple that's been married 50, 60 years, and they're killed together. Sometimes you hear about a spouse, a couple who is old, and one of them is in really bad shape, and you have a murder-suicide. These are people who maybe are luckier in that they go together. Women are much more likely to be the survivor as far as it goes, because you all live longer and healthier. But fairly often, in a long-term relationship, the surviving partner does not survive very long, particularly for men. Men seem to need that relationship and often don't survive their wives by very long. Women, on the other hand, whereas there is an increase in death shortly after the loss of a long-term spouse, women fairly often take the opportunity of having the independence and freedom of not having a partner to really change their lives and start something totally new. Again, a lot has to do with the person and their beliefs. Men are much more likely to be remarried than elderly widowers. The older you get, the more likely this is. It's because there are a lot more available older women than there are available older men. I did mention that there are women everywhere who read the obituaries and go to the funerals to see if they can't snag themselves another guy. Losing a parent, again, this is the norm. Generally, our parents die before us. And it's usually in middle age unless they waited real long to have children. And this is what we expect. It is still distressful, even if we know it's coming, it has to happen. It does cause us very often to reevaluate where we are and what we're doing. It takes away part of our the support system that we tend to depend on, even if it's just advice and things like that. It can impact other relationships. More responsibility. My sister has stayed here in Brownfield all her life, and a big part of it was because my mother was there and she wanted to be there too. Can bring families together, but just about as frequently it can break families apart. Losing a child is probably the toughest thing because we don't expect it. Again, in the past, and in fact in some cultures today, children don't get names until they're 3 years old, and the expectation is that they're going to survive because so many are lost in early childhood. So that's not how it is in the United States anymore, in most of the developed world. So it's become a major issue, and very seldom can parents really get prepared for something like this. Some parents never get over it. If there's any room for it, marriages often break up after the loss of a child, particularly if there is any possibility of blame being assigned to one or the other or both parents. Guilt is part of it. You couldn't keep your child alive. Don't know how to do what to do about that besides just try to get past it. Try to look at it on a rational level, though that's very difficult. In things like suicides, accidents, fairly often, blame can be assigned, then it tends to tear up the marriage and end it. Sometimes people can get past it and be stronger later on. I do consider miscarriage it is death of a dream. It's a lot harder to deal with. We don't have a cultural way of dealing with miscarriages. They tend to be more impacting as the pregnancy goes along, and if it's a stillbirth, I consider it just the loss of another infant at birth. Maybe even tougher than that if they know ahead of time that it's gone. For men, we don't have the opportunity to hold the baby, to become attached to the baby, to connect to the baby, if it's lost in as an embryo or fetus. So it's really the pain of our partner that we have to deal with, and that sometimes is very difficult. Suicides, pretty common, 32,000, 2005. Third leading cause of death in adolescents, first or second for those who are identified or identify themselves as LGBT. We have that heterocentric society that thinks that heterosexuality is the way to go. We put a big load on the people who don't fit in our norms. Things go up with age, particularly with white men. Men in general, women in general are more likely to attempt suicide. Men are much more likely to be successful at suicide. Rates are real high in Native Americans and in white males over 50. Generally, they take a sure way out, guns or other things. Warning signs: withdrawing, ideation, or talking about death and suicide, giving away the things that mean the most to them to people that they want to have them, personality changes, emotional changes, all sorts of things. Different people act different way. It's a pretty depressing thing to consider. What I do understand you need to watch out for is if they've been depressed and upset for a period of time and then all of a sudden they seem happy or relieved and calm. That is fairly often an indication that they have decided that they are going to do it, and they don't have to argue with themselves anymore. Well, we put off, medicine was all about putting off death. Now medicine can sometimes be used to help death, hasten it. Active euthanasia, passive euthanasia, these are allowing people to die. Active euthanasia is often considered to be murder in our society at this time. This generally has to do with people who are unable to express their own desires for whatever reason, due to injury, dementia, whatever the case may be. They are no longer able to express themselves. Active very often is providing overdoses of medication or mixing medications that are likely to cause death. Again, it is generally considered murder. I think it probably happens a lot more than we know about. Passive euthanasia is pulling the plug, just stopping the treatment and allowing the person to die naturally. Since this, we never know when we might become incapacitated and not be able to express ourselves. Even for young people, there's Terry Shrivo case where she was 25 years old, ended up 10 years or so of lawsuits having to do with her passive euthanasia. She didn't put her desires in words. Her husband said that he and she had talked about it, but there was no proof. So a durable power of attorney that gives somebody who you trust and have talked to about it the rights to make the decisions for you can be very important, even if you're young. Assisted suicide, I do recommend the movie You Don't Know Jack. It's about Jack Kevorkian. He's a bit of a hero to me. I know a lot of people disagree with his stance, so they would probably disagree with mine. But to me, we should have the right to decide how we want to leave this world under reasonable conditions. There are a couple of states, Washington, Oregon, have assisted suicide laws. They have safeguards. After a GP has determined that something's terminal, the person has to go to 2 specialists and get diagnoses of terminal illness and prognoses of a fairly short amount of life expectancy. Also take into account pain and suffering of the client patient. And if they 2 experts, specialists do agree that it is terminal, then the person has to go to a therapist and have the therapist determine that the person is of sound mind and understands what their decision to commit suicide means. They understand that death is death. So I kind of think that it's set up well. Very few people use it. But again, if I was in really bad straits and it was terminal, I would prefer to have a professional assist me in leaving rather than having to shoot myself in the head or something like that. Sometimes those things don't work out, and it usually is not a nice thing if you shoot yourself in the head and you survive it. So personally, I am for assisted suicide. Advanced directives. I thought there was one on the pros and cons. Advanced directives, again, will protect what happens to you. You can do not resuscitate. You can have various levels of what's acceptable if something happens and you can't make your wishes known in treatment in cases of accident and such. So living wills, these are some of the things that are very important. The medical durable power of attorney is definitely important. You can get these online and download them for Texas. I recommend that. Fill them out, run them, take them by a lawyer, spend $100 letting them look over them and saying what you need to do or if they're okay, and then go talk to your parents, family members, your close people, anybody who you think might be involved if you suddenly become incapacitated, and give them copies of it. Let them know where you stand. Take copies to your doctor, to the hospitals in the area. This won't guarantee that what you want will happen, but it'll make it a lot more likely that it'll happen. Okay. Came afterwards. So and I do think, isn't it better to make those kind of decisions for yourself rather than to leave them up to people who love you to make them in very emotional situations? Arguments for, again, we've been talking about autonomy since 2 years old. It's one of the big struggles. They want to be autonomous. They want independence. So throughout our lives, we fight more and more independence, particularly early part of life. And aging is part of aging is the loss of autonomy. So very often you've got somebody who's really had all their rights taken away from them, and they are dependent on other people pretty much for everything. So, this is their opportunity to have say in the last thing that has something to do with their lives. I support that. Relief of suffering, preservation of dignity, I think that's very important. And just helping the patient do what they want to do and what need to do. Arguments against taking life is wrong. Well, we take lives a number of ways. Even as a government, we take lives. Texas is pretty famous for the number of lives it takes every year. Execution and legal murder is homicide as far as it goes. So I find a little bit of problem with this one. Concern for protecting the disadvantaged, I do see problems with that. Some people might want to hurry some people along. And when similar things like this, like the eugenics movement and other medical philosophies and programs that in the past have tended to impact minorities, poor people more often than whites and better off people. So I do think that there is some worry about that. Possible misdiagnosis by the doctors. If you get two specialists, that kind of cuts that down. Yeah, there is some concern on this one, but there's concerns for everything. I figure they've got it covered enough as far as I'm concerned. Slippery slope of who can and should engage in assisted suicide. Isn't it overall the decision of the person? I mean, put restrictions on it. I don't have any problem with that. But as far as it goes, putting restrictions, if somebody's going to decide to commit suicide and they have the ability to do it, they're going to do it. We're looking more at people who can't do it themselves, or possibly have religious beliefs against pulling the trigger themselves, but not so much about somebody else helping them do it. Organ donations, I urge you to become a donor. You can do it through voting. You can do it online. Somebody told me at where you get your driver's license, or you sign up for voting, that sort of thing, you can sign up for organ transplant. If I'm young, I am an organ donor as far as I'm on the registry. If I get old enough and my parts aren't worth much anymore, I'll just donate my body to science and let them take care of it. I won't need all that stuff when I'm dead. And if you ride motorcycles without a helmet or riding cars without seat belts, please go ahead and sign up as a donor. My sister refers to people on she calls them donor cycles, because fairly often those kind of accidents, you have severe head trauma and brain death, but you've got a functioning body, so you can keep you alive, jerk your organs, and help other people. Here are some other situations about the end of life. I didn't cover these in class, so they won't be on the exam, but just to give you some thoughts. Again, death is really not dealt with by Navajos. They just don't want to go there. The life review, we talked about reviews before. Midlife reviews, some people have a crisis, a lot of us just have reviews. Several of you mentioned the quarter life review at about 25. I went through one of those. I've gone through a number of reviews. Sure, I'll go through some more as time goes on and the world changes and I change. But this is the last one we get to go through. And it is the end of Erickson's stages. Again, he starts at birth, ends at death. And he said that in late adulthood, when we are approaching death, that ego, integrity, or despair versus despair is the last stage. And so basically what he says we need to do to be successful and to gain true wisdom is that our life is worth living. We'll always regret some things. doing some things, not doing some things, but hopefully when we get to the end, it's worthwhile. It's been, a reasonably good trip through life. Lots and lots of ways to do life reviews, and as we get more and more technology, there's more opportunities. I would have loved to have webcams available and recorders available, talking to my grandparents about their lives when we did that sort of thing. I'd love to have my mom sit down and do a story of her life for my descendants that will never know her. Oh, a bucket list would probably work well too. It is the end of the process. It happens to all of us. We started at conception, we end in the tomb. We don't know what's going to happen afterwards. Some people claim they do. I don't believe them. I'm not saying that what they believe is not true. I'm just saying I don't think they know. But, it is part of the process. It's universal. The earth is going to end and die someday. The sun's going to die. According to some, the universe will end at some point in time. So you might, I don't want to rush death, but at least at this point in time, I think that if I knew it was going to happen, that I would be able to deal with it in a reasonable way. The end.